This is the same old man. Game
Here's Johnny. You're gonna need a big approach. So serious. Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 90 for November 9th, 2014, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks, Brendan, for being here this week. I'm really looking forward to episode 90. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Before we get going into it, I want to introduce our awesome guest, Nate Cunningham from houndsports.com, and also has an awesome podcast that he's invited me onto several different times before. Nate, welcome back to the show, man.
Hey, how are you guys? It's always good to be back. Awesome. That's the first time I've had awesome included in my...
Well, it should be more. So
my wife listens, clearly.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you do with your writing and your podcast, and where can we find it on the internet?
Sure. Well, you can find everything from houndsports.com, and I'm the editor of the NFL section over there. We've got a great team of writers. If you're into the sports thing, and if you're into more pop culture / comic booky news, movies, those kind of things, then head on over to the houndsports.com / the green room. And we've got a great podcast over there, the Green Room Report, that's hosted by myself and my co-host Justin Benatti. And we've had a bit of a break over the past couple months. We've had some different jobs and things come up. So we've been kind of all over the place. And but it's a lot of fun. We put up a lot of great stuff over there. I know we were one of the first to get up on after the Ultron trailer leak. So that was really cool to have a bunch of people finally talk to us about
Sure.
Man, this is can't wait till this gets taken down. It's like, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I definitely couldn't recommend the podcast more. It's a lot of fun. It's really, really great stuff. And thanks again, Nate, for being here. For this week's show, it's going to be quite interesting. We're going to be talking about Christopher Nolan's latest in Interstellar, which has been getting all kinds of comments on the internet, which has been interesting to read. And going off of that, we're going to be discussing our top 3 space movie characters. And for our third segment this week, we're going to be doing a segment we call Over Under, and we'll explain more once we get to that segment. Before we get going into it, though, I'll toss it to you first, Nate. How was your guys' week?
It was good. We pretty much my entire week was centered around Interstellar, so it was making sure that I had my entire Friday night free so that I could go and enjoy the movie. So yeah, and I think I'm interested to see where you guys were at, but I'm kind of glad that I did plan my whole week around it. I'm glad I didn't have anything else to think about while I was sitting in the theater.
Yeah, for sure.
I think smart decision on that part. Yeah.
How was your week, Brendan?
It's over.
It is over. It is. That's for true.
Yeah, I'm still feeling a little depressed because we just watched that Steelers beat down against the Jets right now, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you say it this way. The Steelers just lost to the Jets. That doesn't really make any sense.
Especially as hot as the Steelers were the last few weeks, and then oh boy,
I mean, it just I'm really confused by that. And on top of that, I'm still sitting on this giant burrito from Chipotle that's now just making me feel like I'm sinking into this chair.
Nice.
but it was tasty, and you know what's funny? I'm still hungry, man.
That's what Chipotle will do to you.
But otherwise, week's going okay, kind of flying by. Nothing really I wouldn't say nothing really eventful, but I'm still in the middle of my move to Nashville, so it's just coming up in about a week and a half. So I'm still kind of getting some things finalized with that, which is getting kind of it's starting to really get down to the nitty gritty and really down to the corner for it. So it's getting kind of busy in that regard. But
very nice. I had a pretty interesting week, a pretty great week. Speaking of the NFL, so I had this fun little bet with the guys over at the True Romance podcast. So my Lions today played the Miami Dolphins, and they're big fans of the Miami Dolphins. And we had this interesting bet that if the Lions won, if my team won, that they had to go on their show and give 10 genuine, authentic compliments about the Transformers series. And if the Dolphins win, I had to do the same thing about Man of Steel. And of course, everyone knows that I'm not a huge fan of Man of Steel.
That's an understatement.
So it was this really interesting bet. And of course, my Lions won today. So thankfully, Man of Steel still sucks. I don't have to talk about it. But I look forward to hearing them talk good things about the Transformers series. That should be quite fun. But other than that, one thing I want to plug real fast is for our latest extra film. Brennan and I got to talk about one of my favorite movies of the year in Birdman, and we also talked about St. Vincent on that show. Definitely go and check that out. That was a really great discussion Brennan and I had about that film. So
and definitely go check out that movie if you haven't seen Birdman, especially. It's a fantastic film. It really is.
Very, very, very good. Before we get going into it, though, on a little bit more of a sobering note, obviously you probably hear that Blake is not on the show once again. And for a very heartbreaking and sad reason, just want to put our thoughts and prayers out there for Blake as he is having a tough situation right now with some family matters, and it's not looking great. And we just want to say, Blake, we miss you. Hope things are getting better for you and your family, and we are definitely praying for you. Our thoughts definitely go out to you in that. So hopefully we'll get you back on the show soon whenever you're ready, man.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
all right, that being said, let's get into it.
And here we go.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 90. All right, let's set the humor at 70%.
This podcast will self-destruct in 10, 9, 8.
Okay. How about 60%?
Murph is a great kid. She's really bright, but she's been having a little trouble lately. She brought this in to show the other students the section on the lunar landings.
Yeah, that's one of my old textbooks. She always loved the pictures.
It's an old federal textbook. We've replaced them with the corrected versions,
Corrected.
explaining how the Apollo missions were fake to bankrupt the Soviet Union.
You don't believe we went to the moon?
I believe it was a brilliant piece of propaganda that the Soviets bankrupted themselves, pouring resources into rockets and other useless machines.
Useless machines.
And if we don't want a repeat of the excess and wastefulness of the 20th century, then we need to teach our kids about this planet, not tales of leaving it.
You know, one of those useless machines they used to make was called an MRI. And if we had any of those left, the doctors would have been able to find the cyst in my wife's brain before she died instead of afterwards. And then she'd have been the one sitting there listening to this instead of me, which would have been a good thing because she was always the calmer one.
All right, Interstellar is directed by Christopher Nolan and stars Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, Jessica Chastain, and a bunch of other people that we'll get into. I'll toss it to you first, Nate. What did you think about Christopher Nolan's Interstellar?
Well, I thought that it was an extremely ambitious film. I thought that it tried to accomplish a lot, and I'm not sure if it got there on all the fronts that I'm sure he was hoping that it would. I thought that the things that did well, it did extremely well. Like, I thought that you really felt small. I thought it did a great job of conveying scale. And I think that the score was great, and there was obviously some cinematography involved. There were some beautiful, beautiful shots. But I do think it fell short in some areas. I think that it was almost strange for me for a movie to go so scientific the whole way and then kind of hit you with that curveball at the end that was a little.
Sure. Sure.
And I do think, I mean, I joked earlier that I'm glad I didn't have anything else on my mind. And when I was out of the theater, I was like, holy smoke. I feel like I just, like mentally, I'm exhausted after sitting through this film. Because it's almost 3 hours. It's a long time to be sitting in one spot in a theater, trying to take in everything that's going on. Overall, I enjoyed it. But I think some of the things that held back held the film back for me personally was that there was the whole premise is that Earth is dying, right? So like we have to leave Earth and find another world that can sustain life so that the human race does not end. But I thought they did a really poor job of conveying to me how bad a shape the Earth was. Yeah. Because like you see it in their fields and like their neighbors' fields, and like that one generic road in town where the dust storm hits twice. Sure. And I really wish that we could have seen something else on a national scale.
We at least know where they're at. It's bad. Mm-hmm. That's about it, though.
But I mean, I think so that I just wanted to be able to feel like Earth was dying. Sure. Like wanted to be able to see it more. But I think in some ways maybe they tried to do that because the people on in space didn't know how bad Earth was as they were up there. You know what I mean? Like they would get the little videos or whatever, but they couldn't see it firsthand either. Sure. So it makes me wonder if part of what Nolan was trying to do was make us feel isolated with that group of astronauts in space, and that we're all a little confused and we don't know what's going on and we're all overwhelmed. And if that was the point, then I mean clearly it did that, but it just didn't work for me.
Or what about you, Brendan?
I think that's pretty interesting, and I think it's all about perception too. Because I guess from my eyes, I just want to make that comment about the state of the Earth in this film and how Nolan kind of represents that. Yeah, is that we don't really get a whole lot about what's going on with the Earth. It's really just this small portion of where these people still live, strictly around Matthew McConaughey's farming town and everything like that. But personally, I kind of got the vibe that this was one of the few places of where humanity is still alive. I felt like that most of Earth was already dead. I kind of got that vibe for some reason. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but I felt like that there was isolation on Earth already, and this was one of the small places that still held humanity, or still people could still sustain life, I guess you could say.
Either way, though, you have to make that assumption because the film does not make it clear.
It doesn't, but I for some reason I felt that though. And it wasn't me trying to make myself feel that way. The film somehow projected that to me, and I don't know if that was maybe an accident or whatever. I don't know if that was the plan all along. But I did feel that sense of isolation there. But kind of going on to my thoughts of the movie, and I'm gonna requote something I said after we saw Birdman. We walking out basically saying, "This is one of my favorite movies I've ever seen." Or this is one of the worst films I've ever seen. Sure. I felt like this movie really is a battle of two extremes. And, we kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, JD, but I think the right words to describe where I'm at right now is on the fence. And I think it's because, but I did tell you, though, I am leaning more towards one way or the other. And personally, mainly just from the filmmaking standpoint of this movie, I did really like it. And even after I walked out of the movie theater, my first thought I said was, I think this is Nolan's best film. I actually had that thought. Then I started thinking about it more. I was like, wait, did this part really work, or does that really work? And I started having some retractions. But at the same time, I do really like this movie, and I want to like this movie. But I also want to comment that I feel like a lot of the things that people are picking out as flaws in this movie, I think are pretty unfair. And this is where I told you about I might get a little angry during this podcast, because I feel like there's a lot of criticisms that people are throwing out there that are very, very unfair. One thing is that I really don't think this is a movie you can properly review on one sitting. And when we've already seen it only 2 days ago. I think there's a lot to chew on here. There's a lot of theory and science, and I actually think that they did a very good job going into the theory and science in a way that did serve the story. It was subtle enough, but it wasn't like we were sitting in a classroom for an hour like I kind of thought it was going to be, and they just tell us all this stuff from Kip Thorne's theories. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of the criticisms I've read about this movie after I went and saw it was that I feel like the common term is that the movie has this. It basically reaches for the stars and doesn't have the grasp to try and quite get there. It basically that there's not enough substance in its subject matter that it really tries to push home for that. And I feel like that's not a fair criticism unless you fully understand all these theories that they're presenting here. I feel like the only person that can criticize it that way is Kip Thorne himself. So I feel like a lot of those criticisms are a bit unfair. But I liked the way it went into the science. I thought the third act of this movie is very bizarre. And it does a weird job kind of blending that bizarre sensibility, but with a kind of a heartfelt way about it too, kind of going into its themes about familial love more than anything else. But in many ways, I kind of like that. Because like the best science fiction movies, it takes existing theories like this movie does, but it also takes liberties in those too and actually tries to explain it in its own way that may not even be true. And I feel like that's what's frustrating a lot of people here too. I kind of like that. I like when it takes that chance and takes liberties and kind of pushes the boundaries and wants to tell its own story around existing data, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I like that about it. So I really feel like I'm leaning more towards that. I'm going to end up loving this movie as time goes on. I think great sci-fi movies in particular, as well as great movies in general, have always tended to be great dividers. And this movie has a lot in common with 2001: A Space Odyssey in the way it presents its theories and information that in a very vague way and kind of has to have you think about it yourself. And 2001 was not very well received when it first came out either. It only took years. I'm not saying that's going to be the same thing with Interstellar, but I think that there's a lot of really good stuff here. I think a lot more good stuff than at least than things that I didn't like about it. And overall, at least at this point now, I really did like this movie, like quite a lot.
Well, for me, as you talked about, Brendan, I'm very much on the fence with this film, and depending on the kind of arguments that's presented, I could definitely lean one way or another. I will say, walking out of the theater, my first reaction to this film was that a lot of this film was getting a lot of hype beforehand. A lot of people were comparing it to 2001. Maybe it'll be this generation's 2001. And the first thought that I had was the only character that I really loved in this film was a non-human character. And so that was kind of my first initial thoughts when I first saw it. But in all seriousness, the film did not grab me very much. I do agree with you, Nate, that the film is very ambitious and it goes for a lot of things that is going to be polarizing, and I can appreciate that. I think all of that is great, but like I said, to me it does feel very overstuffed, and it supplemented style for story, and I'm okay with style, but in this instance though, it just seemed to overtake the story. It lacked substance and really just left me empty at the end. But speaking of 2001, I think that's a great example that has a lot of style to it. It's one that you definitely have to sit on a few times, but I think there is a coherent story there that you can kind of grab onto. And I thought that Nolan wanted to do something that was meaningful, that was kind of in the same vein, but he forces a lot of storylines that just ultimately didn't make sense at all. And that to me is the biggest thing. Now, Brendan, we were talking about earlier how there was really just one big thing that was keeping me from liking this film.
Sure.
Because there's a lot here to appreciate. I love all of the technical aspects of the film, which we can kind of get into a little bit. But the main problem I have with this movie is the writing of it. To me, I think is atrocious. It's almost comical at times. There's this one scene where Matthew McConaughey is talking to some teachers and they're talking about the moon landing, which added nothing to the story, was very confusing. The way that they stumble across NASA and how all of that plays is so forced and so contrived. And another thing that really, I think, took me out of the film at that point is once they do find NASA, after this really gorgeous setup, by the way, I thought the setup to the movie was really great. The pacing all of a sudden changes abruptly and really kills the fluidity of the film. And all of a sudden the dialogue now gets more heavy, which felt out of place. And they're having conversations that within their little group wouldn't happen. Because I understand that the dialogue there is for the audience, right? Because we don't know the science behind it. But to them, it just didn't feel natural to me. I felt like there was a different way that they could have wrote that into the film that would have felt more natural. You know, then there's this cameo that happens about halfway through the film that I'm not going to reveal here, but the motivations of that character didn't make any sense. There's a really great sentimental moment at the end between Matthew McConaughey's character and his daughter, but there's a build up to that moment, and then when the moment happens, it flies by like it was never a big deal. So to me, there was a lot of that throughout the film that just really threw me off, despite some of the pretentious third act that we can get into, because I do think there's some really great stuff there happening despite its pretentiousness. But there was a lot of story elements, a lot of plot elements, dialogue that just didn't make any sense. It felt so unnatural, and it really was distracting for me from beginning to end. So overall, while technically it's gorgeous looking, the score, as we mentioned, is really great. The story, which is the heart of the film, obviously, and for any movie, was just lost. Despite the science or the theory of science, like none of that is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the abstract nature of it or trying to nitpick the science. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. I'm just talking about the story in general was lost and messy, and so was I. And so while I wanted to love this film, even though I felt this way walking out, I still tried to talk myself into it. I want to love this film. I want to like it. I want to like it because I love Christopher Nolan. I love just about everything he does, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't like it. But there is a lot still to appreciate here. So I don't hate the movie.
Oh, right.
It's just frustrating to me because while there's a lot great here, the story was just a huge, huge disappointment. Ultimately, for the film, is a huge disappointment for me.
I think one of the things that I know, JD, you and I have talked about this a lot before is taking a movie for like what it's trying to be. Like I know we talked about this because we're both fans of Pacific Rim and like Godzilla. And you know, like those movies they were sci-fi, geeky. That's what they were trying to do. So you're like, okay, I'm going to take that at face value and I'm going to enjoy myself with this movie because I know what it's trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think with Nolan's Interstellar, you saw a movie that it either didn't know what it was trying to do or it knew all too well what it was trying to do and it was too much. Because I think you hit on something that was key, and like you said, a lot of those conversations that they have on the ship, that's there for us because we don't get it.
Exactly.
But then like the people that are having these conversations are NASA scientists, and they're people like McConaughey's character takes down a drone with his laptop in like the first 4 or 5 minutes of the movie and takes it apart and can like break the whole thing down. So you know he's not dumb either. So it felt out of place for these people to be talking like that and it was at that moment where I felt like I was almost being talked down to. It was like, well, we know that you're too dumb to get it if we don't have this forced dialogue right here. So that's the thing. It's hard to take Interstellar for quote like what it is when it's trying to be so much at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. And the thing is, I don't disagree with this criticism at all. In fact, I also wrote down on my notes that I do think the weakest part of this movie is the script. It is the screenplay. Sure. And it's mostly not for me, it was mostly due to the dialogue itself. I do agree that the way that Coop does stumble upon NASA is a bit, I think force is the right way for it. It almost kind of seemed a bit random. The main reason why I think about it is that if it's being run and held by his former mentor, or boss or whatever it was, played by Michael Caine, wouldn't they have recruited him already?
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't make sense for him to have had to stumble
He stumbles
upon.
there, and then 5 minutes later, he's flying the ship. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Right, yeah. It didn't take a lot of convincing on that part. And at the same time, kind of talking about the just from a dialogue standpoint, I think what this movie needed was a character like Ellen Page's character in Inception, who basically was the audience.
She was the audience. Yeah.
I think maybe what they could have done. See, in this movie, Matthew McConaughey's character of Coop is a NASA pilot, and that's what he is by trade. But it's possible that someone like him doesn't understand wormhole traveling and things like that. Maybe they could have made his character less knowledgeable of this stuff, so they're teaching him these things, and as they teach him, it makes sense for the story, and we're learning it at the same time.
The few moments we get that is at the beginning with Coop and Murph, his daughter, where he's trying to explain to her a few different things, and because she's young, she doesn't understand everything,
right?
And it makes sense there, like that is natural, and then you know, Murph is representing the audience in that matter, but it doesn't continue that.
It's too brief, and then as she gets older, we know that she becomes a scientist herself. So it's way too brief, and it was definitely forced, as you guys said. And there are a lot of moments from a story aspect that are pretty forced, and we'll talk a little bit later by the surprise cameo. I think that there was even, I think the character itself and the motivations were fine, because I thought it did a good job representing finally representing the pain that humanity is going through to struggle to survive. I thought that part was
good.
Of it was good. Yeah, but the way it was handled did feel forced. I think there's almost like a villainy aspect to it that I did think was,
I would question his motives, though. Doesn't make any sense. Like, I understand the sentimental parts that you're talking about.
Yes.
Of course, there's going to be an emotional aspect.
Yes.
But the way that he carries that out doesn't make any sense for the story or for those characters. Like, it didn't have to really involve those characters to the degree it goes.
It's like they were. Someone came in and said, "Okay, you need more conflict in this movie." That's kind of what it felt like.
We need drama, so let's create some.
Yeah,
and it becomes contrived.
And that's what I was kind of getting at there. And I kind of alluded that during our discussions before we got on here. That was my problem with that character. And when we get to bonus content and spoilers, we'll talk a little bit more about But kind of going off a little bit more, I think the reason why I did say that overall I find myself really liking this movie is because for some strange reason, despite the the story rush, like the way the story kind of brushes over things and kind of forces things in, I was still moved by it. And even by the ending, there's a moment when it gets to a third act that's kind of cathartic, kind of emotional. I did tear up a little bit. I was moved by it, and I think it's mainly because I did find myself interested in the character motivations of these people. I did really like the relationship between Murph and the character of Murph, Coop's daughter, and her father, Matthew McConaughey. I thought, for the most part, I was with that. And I know most people aren't, though. Most people do find this movie quite emotionally cold and kind of sterile. And I guess I can see where they're coming from. But for some reason, I was moved by it. And I thought, for the most part, the drama did work for me. And I can't really say why unless I really go into spoilers. But I think I think it's mainly because the themes that Nolan's trying to represent here about familial love, and we can get a little more into that later, I did think was pretty consistent throughout the movie, and I felt that throughout it. But still, granted, there are a lot of script flaws here. I think unlike a movie like Inception, which is a really consistent script, and it knew exactly where it was trying to go. I mean, Nolan had been planning that movie for years, and you can tell there was the blueprint there was just all the dots were connected on that movie, and I feel like that there were just still some there were still some dots here that just didn't quite fit into the timeline or the line connecting them all. I think that there were still some things that were not quite handled well, but at the same time, I was still moved by it, and I really can't explain why unless we get into spoilers. But it did hit me in moments. It really did.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to bounce off of that real fast, though, before I get to that. One thing that you were saying, Nate, that I definitely want to touch on real quick, too, is that you mentioned how, maybe that Christopher Nolan didn't know exactly what he was doing with this film, or maybe he did, and it just didn't come off really well. I do think he knows what he was doing with this film. I just felt like, to me, he was just too much in love with himself, and it became overstuffed. Like, he introduced too many elements that just didn't work. But one of those elements that goes back to what you're talking about, Brennan, is the heart of the film. And while it does have style and there's a lot of story to this, ultimately this movie is about family, and that family is the most precious thing in the universe. And it is very sentimental. I will say that was one of the things that I was trying to grab onto the most, because it was wearing its heart on its sleeve in so many different instances.
Yeah.
That being said, it goes back to something I was saying to you before, Brennan, about how there was one main thing that was hindering this film for me in the writing of it. Now, this script was originally written for Steven Spielberg.
I know that.
And I think that is the big difference for me, because Christopher Nolan is obviously not Steven Spielberg, and he doesn't have the experience, and he doesn't necessarily have the care to direct a film with this much sentimentality in it the way that Spielberg can. And obviously, we all know Spielberg is the master of this. Writing a script like this script probably would have been perfect for Spielberg, because he would have been able to do the sci-fi aspects, as we all know that he can do well.
Oh, yeah.
With heart, which obviously we know he can do well. And to me, it felt like Christopher Nolan was just lacking focus, and that the sentimental aspects of it's into the script, so he has to do it, but it wasn't his main focus of the film. I feel like what he was wanting to do was present the third act in this very abstract way. I think that's what he was getting into, and that was the big thing that he was focusing on. And a big reason why I say that is because a lot of the bigger parts of the film that focuses on the sentimental aspects, including the reunion at the very end, goes by in 60 seconds. It's a huge built up. It's supposed to be this big cathartic moment, and it's nothing. I was able to grab onto it a little bit just because I'm an emotional person by nature, and I could put myself into their shoes a little bit. But I don't think the film did the best job of building up those moments and letting you soak in those moments like Spielberg can. And to me, I think that was the big reason why people are so polarized on the film.
I think one thing this movie also needed to be able to do better was that the balance here between the science and the drama, I think, was just wasn't quite there. And that's something we know Spielberg is very good at, especially when it comes to his sci-fi films. I think Spielberg has made some of the greatest sci-fi films in the past 50 years.
Sure.
I think AI is one of the best films of the decade. I mean, I told you that many
really like
times.
that
And I
film
think
too.
that movie does a beautiful job blending science and sentimentality very well. I mean, I will argue that ending is a great ending,
I
despite
agree.
what people say.
I
But that's
agree.
beside the point.
I like it a lot too.
I think one thing Nolan does like, I think, when it comes to this movie is that I feel like he was more in love with the science of it.
Yes.
And that's not a bad thing, because it has some really interesting ideas here that are worth talking about.
Sure.
And at the same time, I wouldn't say that he's inexperienced in the drama or the sentimentality of it.
Not to the level of Spielberg, or not to the level that this script was written for.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right. I think he's more of a subtly emotional, sentimental kind of director, because there are moments of emotion that happens at the end of Inception that work for me, but it works in the nature of that film. He's good at creating moving films, but you're right. This script was more. It was more in vain to work for someone with like that Spielberg has that kind of connection with. And I think the movie would have, I think the themes of familial love and family that you're talking about probably would have hit home better in someone's hands that had that kind of experience doing that.
Sure.
That also could get the science of it. I mean, and I think it would have been a better balanced film maybe in those hands. But I mean, even so, the movie it overall worked for me, but knowing it could have spent more time on family. There are things that are brushed over that you mentioned, and that is true. And they could have had some more human focus in this movie that I think that there are moments that it was lacking. I think one thing it could have done is had more of a better relationship established between Matthew McConaughey's character and Anne Hathaway, which I thought that was one of my biggest complaints of the movie too.
Sure.
Great characters in and of themselves, but I didn't really get their connection together. I mean, there's no romantic angle to it, and that's fine. But it leads to an ending sequence where motivations are still kind of questioned for me. Right. But at the same time, there are moments that I was still moved by it enough that I was able to go with the movie. So I like you, I don't hate the movie. I do like this movie almost quite a bit because there are some great things here. But I think the best way to put it is that this movie represents the very best of Nolan and also the very worst of Nolan.
Anything to add to that, Nate?
Yeah, if I could touch on the Cooper and Brandt relationship, Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. And the worst part about that was they teased you with it over and over and over, and you kept on thinking, like, kind of meet eyes in this awkward way, and you kept thinking, oh, okay, now we're finally going to get like the love story, or at least a little bit. Like, we get that this is a desperate situation, but for a movie that tries to drive home the point of how important love is, it's remarkably absent for a large chunk in the middle, besides what you're like what McConaughey's feeling for his family back home.
Sure.
So I kept on thinking that was going to come. And then to touch on the Spielberg factor for a second was I'm glad that you brought that up, JD, because it was funny as I was walking out of the theater, I looked at my wife and I was like, I almost wonder if this would have been better had Spielberg kept it, which I was going to say going into it. And I think part of the reason, I think that I like this movie. It's weird. I'm not totally sure yet. I haven't sold myself that I love it yet. But I think part of the reason maybe why I think that I like it as much as I do is because it was kept so secretive and it had been teased for so long. I mean, I think the first trailer dropped at the Super Bowl last year.
Sure.
And it had been so long. We'd been waiting for this movie, and everything's so tight-lipped. I mean, like, you know how Nolan runs things anyway. Like, very rare does anything get leaked. And it built up this ginormous... there was such a swell of anticipation for this film, and then when I went and you see it, and like I was all excited, like you buy the popcorn and you're sitting down, and and I my popcorn through the previews, and I was like, oh cool, and like Ultron, and I was like, sweet, yeah, I'm loving this, I can't wait. And then like the second the movie started, I didn't even realize until the end, like I hadn't touched the popcorn again, like I wasn't even, and when I left, I was like, I don't know if I just got entertained or if I just got educated or if it was a mix of both. But like you felt like you got put through the ringer. Like I left feeling exhausted, but it wasn't necessarily emotionally exhausting. So I almost wonder if, like you guys said, this would have been better had Spielberg kept it. And it was almost like Nolan got attached to this because of his brother's involvement, and then he was like, well, I'm going to try to make this as Nolan-esque as we can, and we're going to make it's a super secret. We're going to have these great like Inception-esque shots, and people are going to be like, wow, this is like incredible, and this looks beautiful, and I feel like a tiny speck, and we're kind of going to gloss over the emotional parts. And I don't think that worked. I don't think that was the best strategy, because like you both touched on it about how Nolan is okay at creating emotion, but it's a different kind. It's not the same like Spielberg style, and that's what it felt like. You know what I mean? There was somebody who just couldn't get the most out of their actors at this right. It was funny. It was almost like, I don't know, because I don't know if you guys have heard the story. I guess with Zimmer, he didn't tell him anything about the movie, right? And apparently gave him one page of like what he thought the music should represent, or like what Zimmer's story would kind of be. This makes me wonder if it was like that with the cast too, where it's like they knew the plot, but there was never like this point where they sat down and like, this is what people are feeling, this is what we want to convey, this is what you need to be. It makes me wonder if they were just kind of left to their own devices to kind of figure this stuff out, and it didn't really happen. And one of the things is I mean, like, Nolan is a master at keeping you guessing. And there are a couple turns in this film that totally blindsided me. But then there was a lot that felt, like you guys said, it felt forced and contrived. And when you can see stuff, that was my tip-off that I was like, this probably wasn't in there originally. I get like the way the daughter and the son handled things, you know what I mean? Like those kind of things like seem so stereotypical to me, and it's not what I wanted out of a movie that I've waited this long for.
Yeah, I think really I just wanted some sort of commitment. It felt like he was half committed to the science, half committed to the emotional plots, but he would never go one way or the other. And I think that's what the film was lacking overall.
It needed full commitment between both, and that's when it needed to be really well balanced, which this movie wasn't quite there, like I mentioned. Yeah.
All right, well, for the sake of time, we got to get moving on. We'll discuss more of this for our bonus content this week in spoilers, so stay tuned for that. But for right now, Nate, any final thoughts, and what grade would you give Interstellar?
Final thoughts, I guess, would be an extremely ambitious film that I think does a whole lot right, but there's a couple really glaring weaknesses. I would still recommend that people go out and see it. I think that it has the potential to be moving depending on who you are and what kind of mindset that you have going into it. I think part of it was, for me, didn't know anything going into it. And I just kind of expected, because this was Christopher Nolan and because the cast was so good, I just like sat down and was like, I can't wait to be blown away. And it didn't quite come. So if you go with some knowledge a little bit about what this movie is about, I think that might suit you better. So I would say that it's not a bad film by any means. It just tries to do 100 things, and it only does about 75 of them really well. You know.
Sure.
All I would give it I think in the B+ range.
Okay.
I can kind of go along with that too, and I'm in agreement with there too. I think it's interesting. The second I walked out of the theater, I thought this might be my favorite Nolan film. But I think a lot of that kind of comes from the fact that there's a lot of hype around it, and you really want to like it. And I feel like with a movie like this, the hype really is the enemy. And I feel like that there was a lot of expectations going in, but there was also a lot of expectations for what people wanted the movie to be. And I think a lot of the criticisms are also because the movie just wasn't what people wanted the movie to be. And I feel like that's always...
And that's key.
Yeah. But I feel like that's always a problem with Nolan's marketing, because he markets it in such an ambiguous and vague kind of way that people have expectations of what they want it to be then. And that kind of ruins the actual experience sometimes. I think he kind of lucked out with Inception that people got the movie that they wanted, and I think almost everyone did, and that's a great movie in and of itself. But yeah, like I said, I did like this movie. I'm leaning more towards that. I did really like it. Final grade, I'd probably give this around an A- at this point, because I still was moved by it, but there is still that glaring notice that the movie could have been better balanced between the science and the emotion, and the movie could have been even more moving.
Sure.
Like you mentioned, JD, there were moments that it brushes over some familial aspects that I think that needed to have more of a focus to really drive home the theme of familial love.
Sure.
And of course, it's there. It is still there, and it's not a failed attempt to not include it. And the theme does feel consistent throughout the movie, so that's fine. But it still could have been stronger. And even from a personal preference, I kind of wanted this movie to be this one. Like, I guess I've been waiting personally for like a huge scale, smart, hard sci-fi movie to come out that was also beautifully moving. This movie was almost that, but it wasn't quite there because we talked about most issues here are with the screenplay itself and mostly with the dialogue and with the actual writing. There are some forcings here. We talked about the surprise cameo that happens later that is, for the most part, not very well handled or executed.
Sure.
Although, but then again, I just want to talk about a few things quickly, then I'll toss back over to you for your final grade. But there are a lot of great things in this movie. We talked about Hans Zimmer's score is fantastic.
Great.
It is fantastic, and it fits the tone perfectly. The cinematography and visual effects are stunning, and there's a lot of stuff that looks like more like handheld made sets, like almost like it was like matte painting and things like that. Not a lot of CGI, it really looks like here. Maybe on the actual planets that they go on, there's a bit more green screen work and things like that. But there's a lot of visceral physicality to the effects, especially from the space sequences, which I really admired about it. There's a docking sequence that happens maybe about 2/3 of the way through that scared the living shit out of me, and you can bleed me out on that one. But that was like some of the best stuff I've ever seen Nolan direct.
And that kind of harkens back to the 2001 stuff that was so great about that movie.
Yes.
So I agree with your point on that.
Yes, and I think kind of the thing here was that there was just kind of like you were saying, Nate. There's like I feel like that there was like this movie was like you can bleep me out again. This movie was like 10 pounds of into a 5-pound bag. That's kind of what it was. And there was a lot of stuff trying to be thrown in there with familial love and the dramatic angles, and there's a lot trying to go in there with the science. Maybe if the movie was stretched out a bit longer, there could have been a bit more there, or room to kind of spread it out, because the movie was paced well. I mean, it didn't feel like it was nearly 3 hours to me. It actually flew by pretty quickly for me. But I think that it needed to be streamlined in some way that it just felt more less messy in that regard. Overall, I do really like the movie. It's not, thinking about it now, it's not my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. It probably won't end up being one of my favorite movies of the year, which is kind of sad to report. But I still recommend people go out and see it. There's still a lot there that I'm willing to give it an A-. And I was still overall moved by it, even though it could have been more moving.
Well, I think the first thing I want to touch on is when you were talking about how this may not be what people want it to be, and it could differ from their expectations, which it definitely was for me for that. And that is a little disappointing to me, but I do think that is a big thing, because we have talked quite a bit about that, about enjoying a film for what it is.
Yeah.
Meaning I'm going to have to go back and rewatch this a second or third time, and not because of the high concepts, but because it was different than what I wanted.
Sure.
I need to go back and watch it and try to figure more out about what Christopher Nolan was doing. That being said, I do stick to my guns that this is more style than it is substance. So even though I can go back and try to figure more about what Nolan was trying to do with this, I will still say I do think that the script is very messy. And as a director, especially in this medium, it's all about the story. If you don't have a story, then all you have is style. And I guess I'll go to that because I've talked about how I don't really care for this film a ton from the story aspects, but I really did like a lot of this film still. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about the visual aspects, it was really great. I loved kind of the practical kind of sets. At least that's what the design kind of felt like. I thought all of that was great. I guess my only disappointment in that is that this is a film where we get to explore another galaxy and what is supposed to feel more real than something I would say like Guardians of the Galaxy, which is obviously more fiction. And even though they're obviously playing with the science, I would like to see more of this galaxy, or I wanted to see a bigger scale of this brand new galaxy or of these planets. And I don't feel like we get a ton of that. And I feel like that kind of, there was like a lost in the sense of wonder within this that I really wish that they would have explored a little further.
We needed to embrace more of the mystery, I think, and it really didn't go that route. And maybe it wasn't supposed to be about that, and I guess that's fine. But I think with a subject matter like this and how fascinating of an idea that is, that's something people were going to want to see, and it really is.
Well, there is a quote earlier in the film. I believe this is like within the first 15 minutes. Matthew McConaughey, his character says, "We used to look up at the sky and wonder about our place in the stars. Now we just look down at our place in the dirt." And he's talking about exploration and how us as people, we've always been people of exploration and pioneers and paving the way for new things, which is what the space race was really all about. And that's great. All of that is great stuff. And to me, I think that is part of the film. But then again, it harkens back to the other half, which is just the sentimental aspects. There was no cohesiveness as far as the direction of the film. And that to me is what's disappointing. But I will say the performances, we didn't touch on them a whole lot. I do think they're very good. I really like Matthew McConaughey here. He's very emotional. He's very guilt-ridden in a lot of places, but he feels for humanity, and he does understand the scale of what's going on. And I thought all of that was great. There are some secondary characters that are very cliche and wasted, but not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. Another criticism I would have, while I love the score, I do think the sound design was a mess at times. Sometimes the sound, not just the score, but the sound in general was too loud. You really couldn't hear the characters and their dialogue. There were some weird buzzes or loud bass lines that overtook the dialogue. And that is something that comes back from The Dark Knight Rises too. That was a criticism I had of that film, and there's something about Nolan and his sound design that is just a bit off. And I've seen that all over the internet. That's just not me saying that, so I know that I'm not the only one that had that experience.
And it's interesting because it's very possible it could be the theater itself, which I made note of. And the reason why I say that is because, do you know what movie I had that problem with exactly? 12 Years a Slave. Of all things, I saw that in the theater. I couldn't hear what the people were saying, and then I watched the movie again on VOD, and it was a total different experience for me. I think a lot of that does come from the actual sound mixing at the theater itself.
It could be. I guess the reason I bring it up here is, one, I had the same experience in The Dark Knight Rises, so obviously a Christopher Nolan film, and I read a lot on the internet that a lot of people had this issue, so that's why I bring it up. Otherwise, I completely agree with you.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it's very possible.
So again, if I go back and watch this later this week or on Blu-ray and I have the same experience, then we'll know. But it could just have been the theater experience. But outside of that, the third act is a bit of a problem for me, and I'll explain why in spoilers. But again, it just goes back to the story aspects of it. But I want to say, I kind of joked about this earlier about the Lars robot character in this film and how he was my favorite character. I was kind of joking about that, but I really did like this character. I think he's very funny. He's very witty and intelligent, but he's very serious when he needs to be. And when he needs to jump into action, I love the way they built this guy. He was a badass, and the way they transformed into that wheel to save Anne Hathaway was awesome. Like, I loved that character. I thought he was actually one of the more layered characters in the film.
And he had no emotion because he's a robot. But there's one line that he says where Matthew McConaughey asks him what happens if he docks imperfectly, and he goes, "Nothing good."
It was great. I thought he had a nice humor touch to the film. I thought it was great.
In fact, we didn't talk about the humor in this movie. I heard a lot of people had a problem with the humor, but I thought
it was fine. I liked it.
Matthew McConaughey had some funny stuff with his daughter in the beginning too. I just got you suspended.
I agree with that too. For me, it's not the technical aspects of the film. I mean, I loved all of that. It really just comes down to the story. And again, I want to emphasize it's not the abstract nature of it. It's not even the high concept or a lot of the science. Now, that is part of it. And I'll get to reason why in the spoilers. But it's just the story in general is very incoherent. It's messy, and it's not focused. They just needed to take out 5 pounds of that crap in that bag that you were talking about, focus it down and commit to either the science or the emotional aspects. Or maybe you can do both if you just take 50% of that out. So to me, that is the main problem I have with this film. But I do like it overall, or I'm on the verge of liking it. I'll say
Sure.
that. There's enough here that I can appreciate. I would give it a B-.
Okay.
So that's where I'm sitting. But it's one of those films like you were talking about that if you rewatch it again, I had the same experience with Under the Skin earlier this year. Walking out of the theater, I had the same experience. I rewatched it a few days later. I ended up liking it a little bit more. I still am not as high as a lot of other people are, but I can see myself liking this more as time goes on.
Sure,
So
yeah.
we shall see. Anyway, a lot to be said about this film. But if you want to check out more thoughts on this, be sure to go check out our Letterboxd page at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. And once again, stay tuned for our bonus content this week where we will talk about this further in some spoiler territory, which is absolutely needed. So be on the lookout for that as well.
I think so. And also out there, if you agree or disagree with our takes on Christopher Nolan's latest and Interstellar, you can let us know by leaving us a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/InSessionFilm, or you can tweet us at InSessionFilm. You can also leave us a comment on our Google Plus page, or you can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com.
All right, coming up next is the InSession Film Top 3, and we'll be discussing our top 3 space movie characters.
That guy there. I need his prosthetic leg.
His leg?
Yeah. God knows I don't need the rest of him. Look at him. He's useless.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Girl, you just don't realize what you do to me when you hold me in your arms so tight. You let me know everything's alright. I'm hooked on a feeling. I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. Lips as sweet as candy, its taste is on my mind. Girl, you got me thirsty for another cup of wine. Got a bug from you, girl, but I don't need no cure.
All right, Brendan, so we just got done reviewing Interstellar, and when we're talking about the first-time watchers, guys, much like Matthew McConaughey, they're out of this world.
That's really corny.
It is. And they're more coherent than Interstellar's plot is.
That I will agree with. That is incredibly true. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They're a great supporter of our show, and we can't thank them enough for that. And they're also a podcast. Everyone out there, you got to check them out. Tim, Walter, and Hermano. These guys know their movies. Great banter, great chemistry. You gotta love listening to these guys, man.
Yeah, they're absolutely amazing. They're very entertaining, much like other Christopher Nolan films, just not Interstellar.
Interstellar's a little better than that. I'd be curious to hear what their thoughts about this.
There is a lot of entertaining parts about Interstellar.
There's a lot of good things, yeah. But, I mean, on that, aside from that, I'd like to hear what these guys think about it.
Be curious.
They have some great discussions. You know, what's unique about them is that every week they pick a movie that none of them have seen, so there's a lot of nice banter that way.
Sure.
It's very fresh that way, so I really like that. They also talk about trailers that have come out recently. They have other great sections on other movies that that they recommend that might be under the radar and things like that. So they have a lot of good discussions.
Yeah, I love their movie recommendations at the end of their show, and overall it's just really fluid, easy to listen to, and it's a lot of fun. And that being said, Brendan, where can you find them on the internet?
There are a couple ways. You can check them out at thefirstttimewatchers.blogspot.com. You also hit them up on Twitter at FirstTimeWatchers. Also on Facebook, just search for First Time Watchers. You'll find them right away.
Yeah, definitely subscribe to them on iTunes. Leave them a review. Go check them out. I promise it's absolutely worth your time. And we joke about them, but we love them. Definitely go check them out. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
Its taste is on my mind. Girl, you got me thirsty for another cup of wine. Got a bug from you, girl.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 90, and now we're going to be discussing our top 3 space movie characters. Before we get going into it, though, Nate, did you have any criteria that you looked at to pick your list this week?
Yeah, some. I wanted to try, when I first drafted this list up, I had I think like Will Smith's character from Independence Day and those kind of things, and I said, well, that's not, even though there are aliens and there's outer space involved, I wanted to try to stick exclusively to other dimensions, galaxies, those kind of things. So
okay, what about you,
Brian? Yeah, I'm in that same boat too. I wanted to focus on movies that actually took place place in outer space. It could be real movie, like real style movies, maybe like an Apollo 13 and things like that. But the movie had to take place in outer space. So, for example, and I told you this, JD, I would exclude characters that were from other galaxies in outer space, but the movie took place on Earth. So, for example, E.T. Like the character of E.T. I would not consider eligible, even though it's like my second favorite movie of all time.
Sure.
I wouldn't conclude it for this.
Well, I'm pretty much in the same ballpark as you guys. I wanted at least the bulk of the movie to take place. The whole thing didn't have to be in outer space.
Right.
But at least a good chunk of it. And I also did not include any Star Wars, Star Trek, or the Aliens franchise because I've had lots of characters from those movies, and we've talked quite a bit about them regarding this kind of genre before for our top 3, so I didn't want to include any of that. Otherwise, that would be very, very easy. So that being said, Nate, what is your number 3, man?
My number 3, I see I'm already breaking your rule. My number 3 was Darth Vader.
Nice.
Yeah, it's because, I mean, like growing up watching those Star Wars movies and like what you want about the new trilogy. But growing up watching those movies, like there was nobody cooler than Vader. So I think that he had to be on this list in some capacity. And plus, like, one of the biggest film curveballs of all time with the Luke mere father. So
yeah. No, it's a great pick. And like I said, if I would have included them, and I've had him on other lists before, so yeah, it's a great character. And I kind of look forward to revisiting that moment because my wife has never seen these movies. We're going to get a chance to do that pretty soon.
Does she know that reveal, though?
I think so. I don't think she knows the context behind it, though.
Okay, she probably knows at least, that the "I am your father" is a quote.
Yeah, she probably knows the line, but yeah. All right, what do you got at number 3, Brendan?
So my number 3, I have to do this. I have to do a tie.
You and your freaking ties.
This is I've only done it twice, man. I've only done it
other week.
No, I've only done it twice ever, man. All right, so but I'm putting these two I'm putting these two together because they're both robots.
Okay.
So there's a reason for it.
Sure.
One of them is the classic HAL 9000.
Yep.
My favorite probably my favorite sci-fi movie of all time. 2001's fantastic. Sure. Love Kubrick. Love what he does there. Great. We talked about Interstellar, but and some of the comparisons there. But it's just a great idea and story about evolution, things like that. Very mystical, very weird, but Hal is a scary guy. He really is.
Yeah.
And all he is just that red dot. You don't know it. There's no real physical form or robot for him. It's just really computer program. But there's a lot of mystery around it.
It's
and that's
still
why
menacing,
I love it.
though.
Yeah, it's still menacing, and it's that monotone talk. I love it. But I'm tying him with a character. I just had to include Wall-E as well.
You couldn't have picked more opposites of one another.
I know, but they're both not human, so I wanted to put them together. But I absolutely love Wall-E. I think it's one of Pixar's best crowning achievements. And the character of Wall-E himself is just so adorable. It's like, it kind of reminds me of Johnny Five from Short Circuit in many ways. Kind of even looks like him too, but it's what a heroic robot that character is. And I love what he actually goes through, and the growth that he actually has as a robot to appear kind of human too. I thought was kind of interesting, even though it's very family-esque. But what a beautiful movie, and I love that character. He's adorable.
Great honorable mention for me. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what him on my honorable mention as well. Like, for a character that doesn't really say anything for an entire movie other than like, so much emotion is packed into that.
I know it's crazy.
Human actors not having enough emotion in film, and then you look at what they can do
with that animated Wall-E.
Make me cry. Like,
exactly.
Me too.
Very good stuff. For my number 3, I'm going to a CGI character in a live animated film, and we discussed that top 3 actually a few months ago. And should his movie have come out by then, maybe would have been close to making it. For my number 3, I know it's new, but I do not care. I'm going with Rocket Raccoon, man, from Guardians of the Galaxy. I freaking love this character.
No wonder you had me quote that line.
Exactly. I love his cockiness. He's arrogant, but he's extremely smart. He works well with Groot, and he does know his way around difficult situations
and prisons.
And even if that means taking a guy's leg for no reason.
and everything else like that. Yeah.
And just real quick, and then we'll move on, is I do love his sense of humor, as we talked about, but there is an awesome sentimental side to this character that is amazing. There's one great scene where he is cathartic after being called something, and then, of course, there's a great revelation with his deep, all pun intended, rooted love for Groot at the end of the movie. I thought was awesome as well. I thought he's a really well-layered character, especially for CGI.
I agree.
Awesome. All right, Nate, what do you got at number 2, man?
Number 2, I'm going to break your rule again. I have Kane from Alien, and I put him on this solely for that chest burster scene.
Sure.
Like iconic scenes in all of horror, sci-fi, probably in cinema in general, one of the most iconic scenes, with the fake blood. And he never said anything about fake blood. So like you get that real honest, visceral, like terrifying action. Like that's one of my all-time favorite scenes from a movie. So I had to put Kane number 2.
Yeah. Can't get a whole lot better there.
I heard when that movie first came out in '79, people ran out of the theater when that happened.
Sure.
And I actually showed that movie to one of my friends who hates old movies, but he loves a lot of good modern movies. But I wanted to show it to him to prep him for Prometheus because he was really looking forward to that. And when it got to that chest burst scene, I realized how well that scene still holds up because he had a hard time watching it.
It's incredibly visceral.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. All right, so for my number 2, I'm going with what I personally think is it's regarded as a great modern sci-fi movie. It's kind of a smaller film, but I don't think it still gets a lot of credit that it really should have. I think a lot more people need to see it. The character I'm picking is Sam Bell from Moon, played by Sam Rockwell.
Amazing. Great honorable mention for me as well.
Moon, I think, is one of the best sci-fi films I've ever seen.
It's incredible.
I would probably put it somewhere in my top 5, and it is one of the most beautiful, hard sci-fi films that I have seen. Every person I actually recommend going who wants to see it, I don't tell them anything about the story like the trailer kind of gave, because I think knowing nothing about it, it makes it that much more heartbreaking. I think Sam Rockwell's performance here is phenomenal.
Incredible.
I love the relationship he has with his robot Gertie, voiced brilliantly by Kevin Spacey. But the growth of this character and the emotional heartbreak he has. There's a scene where he calls home to his older daughter, and then when the call is done, he starts crying, I want to go home, and then the camera pans to a distant shot of Earth. That is one of the best scenes that I have ever seen in any movie, period. It is absolutely beautiful. It's haunting. That score by Clint Mansell is fantastic. Sam Bell is my number 2.
No, it's a great choice. I've had him on top 3s before, so I kind of left him off this list, but great pick and a great honorable mention for me. For my number 2, it's already been said, so I'm not going to talk about it a ton, but I'm also going with HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Dave, although you took very thorough precautions in the pod against my hearing you, I could see your lips move.
And for all the reasons you said, Brendan, it's incredible. It's very menacing, and I loved his arc of going from what feels like he's innocent to being a little suspicious to being a complete villain by the end of it, and him kind of expressing fear, and the singing of that song at the end. Impeccable work. It's incredible, and definitely one of the best parts of any film I've ever seen.
I think anytime you ask me to do something now, I'm going to respond saying, I'm sorry, JD. I just can't do that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but there is something funny about him going from, or for him being so monotone, but also expressing human emotions at the same time, which is just incredible. So, all right, Nate, give it to us, man. What is your number 1?
Okay, well, it's interesting. I shuffled this list around like 1,000 times because I love sci-fi and that kind of stuff. And everything that's been mentioned so far was on my list at one point or another. So like it's clear that we kind of have the same
all in the same stuff.
Yeah.
And you guys know I'm a comic book guy. So my number 1, even though it's super new, I had to put Groot number 1.
Nice.
All right.
And finally, on the wall back there is a black panel, blinky yellow light. You see it?
Yeah?
There's a Quarnix battery behind it. Purplish box, green wires. To get into that watchtower, I definitely need it.
How are we supposed to do that?
Well, supposedly these bald bodies find you attractive, so maybe you can work out some sort of trade.
You must be joking.
No, I really heard they find you attractive.
Look, it's 20 feet up in the air, and it's in the middle of the most heavily guarded part of the prison. It's impossible to get up there without being seen.
I got one plan, and that plan requires a frickin' Quarnix battery, so figure it out! Can I get back to it? Thanks. Now, this is important. Once the battery is removed, everything is gonna slam into emergency mode. Once we have it, we gotta move quickly. So you definitely need to get that last. Or we could just get it first and improvise.
I'll get the armband.
Leg.
Simply because it's rare that one character can provide comic relief, but at the same time be the center of arguably the most pivotal point in the movie.
Yes.
And plus, it was so cool to watch because you talked about how Rocket was in that film, and then like the juxtaposition with Groot, who was the partner, and I felt like and for just having the one line the whole time, there was so much emotion and power into that character, and I thought Vin Diesel did a really good job with that. So I thought that for his ability to make me kind of run the gambit of emotions, I thought had to be number one on my list.
I completely agree. That ending sequence with him and just that moment that he has with Rocket, incredible. It's incredible the kind of emotion it was able to get. And outside of that, my favorite scene with Groot is at the prison when they're talking about how to escape, and he just goes and takes that thing off the wall. He's not saying anything.
So
it's just what he's doing.
You
It's
definitely
hilarious.
need to get that last, or we could just get it first and then improvise.
I love it. That's a great choice. I love Groot.
I am Groot.
All right, Brendan, what do you got? Number one, man.
My number one may seem like a very generic pick, but you got to go with one of the coolest smugglers in space movie history, and that is Mr. Han Solo himself.
Han Solo. I'm captain of the Millennium Falcon. Chewie here tells me you're looking for passage to the Alderaan system.
Yes, indeed. If it's a fast ship.
Fast ship? You've never heard of the Millennium Falcon?
Should I have?
It's a ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs. I've outrun Imperial starships. Not the local bulk cruisers, mind you. I'm talking about the big Carillion ships now. She's fast enough for you, old man. What's the cargo?
Only passengers. Myself, the boy, 2 droids, and no questions asked.
What is it, some kind of local trouble?
Let's just say we'd like to avoid any Imperial entanglements.
Well, that's the real trick, isn't it? And it's going to cost you something extra. 10,000, all in advance.
Harrison Ford, awesome in this role. It's essentially like the cool Indiana Jones character in outer space, which is exactly what it is.
Yep.
But specifically, I want to focus on his character in The Empire Strikes Back, which is one of my favorite films of all time. But he's just so cocky in this movie. I love the interactions that he has with Princess Leia in the first half of the movie is just so like. It's just so funny. And then that little exchange you have before he goes in the cryo sleep, where she goes, "I love you," and he goes, "I know." It's like, that is one of the most beautiful "I love yous" I've ever seen in a movie. And he purposely said, it was in the script for him to say "I love you" too. And he said he didn't think Han Solo would ever say that. And you know what? He was right. Han Solo wouldn't say that. He would say, "I know."
That is exactly what he would say. Yeah.
And I will also say that for all those who know what George Lucas has done with the changes to Star Wars, no matter what, Han Solo shoots first. When against Greedo in the first in Episode 4, A New Hope.
Sure.
Han shoots first. Always will.
A great choice, a great character. I've had him on other top threes again. Another reason why I just left Star Wars off is because it's so easy to go there. But yeah, fantastic choice for your number one, Brendan. For my number one, I'm going to one I have not had on a top three before. In fact, I hadn't even watched this movie up until this week, but I wanted to watch it in preparation for this top three because I'd never seen it before, and I thought it would be kind of interesting if I liked it enough, if it could make my list. And it absolutely is interesting enough, and I think it's amazing. And I'm going with the group of astronomers from the 1902 film, A Trip to the Moon. And I know we were talking about this before, Brendan, before we went to see Inception. I was telling you how much I enjoyed this after watching this.
You mean Interstellar?
No, not Interstellar. But I really, for 1902, this is just incredible. It's such a fun and fantastical adventure. It's such a perfect movie to kick off the sci-fi genre. And I love the elaborate backdrops and just the fun, creative costumes and the props. And for the time, I thought it was a really interesting and creative look at what might happen if you travel to the moon. And of course, they didn't know the science behind what is going on in the moon and the details and all of that. And so for them to incorporate these aliens and how they would react to that and asking those kinds of questions, I thought was really amazing. And it was a ton of fun. And it is just this magical space adventure that I couldn't recommend more. And it's fantastic. I mean, I would have loved to see this director work with today's technology. I couldn't even imagine.
It'd be mystical, man. It'd be so cool. Yeah, I love this movie as well. I watched it in one of my film classes in college, and I was so I had such a nerdgasm, as I told you, when I went to go see the movie Hugo, and that's essentially that the movie was actually about George Méliès, who directed this.
Sure.
And the automaton drew the poster for A Trip to the Moon with the bullet going into the man in the moon.
Yeah.
And I was like going nuts when I saw that. I went to see it with my sister, and she's like, what does that mean?
It's really funny. Yeah. I really love this movie though. It's not obviously it's not a very long film, but it's really great. I mean, I couldn't recommend it more. It's a lot of fun. So.
Arguably the father of special effects and
incredible. Yeah, the way that they incorporated the smoky poof with the aliens, amazing. So seamless, amazing. All right, Nate. Any other honorable mentions?
No, I mean, nothing that we didn't talk about already. I think pretty much I shuffled through all the different characters on Guardians of the Galaxy at one point, and I went to 2001 a couple times for Hal, and but pretty much we covered most of what my honorable mentions would have been in your guys' list. So
yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I also had Rocket, or I looked at Guardians of the Galaxy as well. One of them I had was I also had Ellen Ripley, from Alien. I specifically her because as a great heroine. I also looked at a film that no one talks enough about, and it's called Galaxy Quest. And specifically, the alien Mathazar. I love that voice. He throws, "We need your help." I love that character. And there's also, I think, a great one is Mal, played by Nathan Fillion for Serenity.
Yeah, it's another one that a lot of people touched on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great character as well.
Very nice. As far as my honorable mentions, you guys talked about them, so I'll just go through them really fast. Obviously, I had Han Solo, or Yoda, or Obi-Wan, or pretty much anyone else from Star Wars. I also had Wall-E as well. I had the Xenomorph from Alien. Sandra Bullock from Gravity is one that I really loved. I really, really loved that movie from last year. Sam Rockwell's character in Moon, as you talked about. And yeah, that pretty much is what I had as my honorable mentions.
All right, so that's our top 3 movie space characters. Let us know how your picks stack up against ours by emailing us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com, or you can leave us a comment on our Facebook or Twitter page, or on our website at InSessionFilm.com.
All right, before we move on, let's talk about this week's poll.
It's real bad, okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, for our poll question this week, obviously in anticipation for Interstellar, we simply asked, what is your favorite Christopher Nolan film? So the choices we had was Memento, Insomnia, The Prestige, Inception, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises, or Interstellar. And winning the poll ever so slightly was Inception with 29% of the vote. And in second place was The Dark Knight with 25% of the vote. And in third place was Memento with 18% of the vote. I guess real quick, Nate, what is your favorite Christopher Nolan film?
The Dark Knight, hands down. And and maybe this is less of Christopher Nolan and more of Heath Ledger's performance. But there was the rumor flying around that Jared Leto was attached to Suicide Squad as the Joker, and those.
Yeah.
It's like, we'll always, just like we did for Nicholson the first time, we'll always hold everybody to what Ledger did as the Joker. But I just thought that if you could, that was almost lightning in a bottle. That was near perfection for an entire movie from some actor, which is something that rarely do you see, where they they kill everything that they're in, and that's what Ledger did in that movie. So that would have to be number one for me. And plus, I'm the comic book guy.
Sure.
So.
It's not a bad pick though either. So what about you, Brendan?
It's still easily Memento for me. I think it's a fantastic movie. I was looking at this. You failed to include his first movie, Following, on there, which I think is really...
No one's going to vote for that.
I may have, just because it's different. No, but still a great movie. But no, Memento, and then probably followed by Inception would have been my top two. In fact, actually looking at his Dark Knight trilogy, Batman Begins is my favorite of those three, just by a slight margin. But I love that it really makes Batman the most interesting character, and it really feels like the best standalone film there. I feel like there's a lot of growth that is explored, where the Dark Knight really just it kind of pushes that to the ending, and unfortunately, the Dark Knight Rises didn't fully go push through with as the best conclusion it could have been. But Batman Begins is the Batman movie that really made Batman relevant again, and it's a beautiful film. It really is.
No, I completely agree with that. As far as my favorite on this list, it would be the one that won it in Inception. And for me, this would probably be in my top 10 of the last decade. I think it's flawless from beginning to end and does such a great job of presenting the idea and the concept without it being too convoluted. And you're able to stick with it, or at least I was, and the ending of it was absolutely flawless. I wouldn't have wanted it to be any different. So I love Inception. Memento, though, is a really great choice. That would be high up there for me as well. And one that nobody talks about, but is maybe in my top 3 for Nolan, is The Prestige. I love that film. I think the balance of those two characters is like a poem. It just dances together so fluidly that I love it. I think it's fantastic. But I'm not going to argue Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. I love both of those films as well. So, and Insomnia is another great one that no one really talks about a ton.
Yeah, very underrated too. And I mean, he didn't write that one though. I know he usually has story credits with his movies, but yeah, he didn't write that one either. But yeah, they're mostly all very good films.
Yeah. Hence my disappointment with Interstellar, because I love just about everything this guy does.
So. Well, and I'm disappointed with The Dark Knight Rises as well.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Anyway, thanks everyone that voted on the poll this week. We really do appreciate it.
All right, well, coming up next, we're going to be doing our segment called Over Under, where we preview some new films and talk about over under possibilities and scores from a Rotten Tomatoes standpoint. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, I just want to pause for a quick second to say a huge thank you to those that are supporting the show. If you want to help support us, there's a couple things you can do. One, you can go to our bonus content on our website, and you can listen to all of our awesome bonus content for just a small donation of 99 cents. They actually are free to listen to, but we do encourage and appreciate that small donation. And as we mentioned earlier, be sure to be on the lookout for this week's bonus content, where we're going to talk about Interstellar and some awesome spoiler territory. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. Also, another way you can help us out is to go to our InSession Film store. You can get an awesome InSession Film t-shirt or mug or tie. Some really cool stuff there. If you go and check that out, and maybe there's an item that you would like to purchase with our logo on it that's not there, hit us up on Facebook or Twitter, email us, let us know. We would love to make that happen for you. And as mentioned up at the top of the show, we're also sponsored by Audible.com. If you go to audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm, you'll get a free 30-day trial. You'll also get a free audiobook just for signing up, and it really helps support this show as well. So no matter what you do, no matter how you support us, even just a subscription to iTunes is a big way to help us out. Either way, no matter what you do, we really, really do appreciate your support.
Hi, this is Greg.
This is Chuck.
And this is Dan, and we are Talking in Circles. Because the world needs another podcast, we are here as Geekcast Radio's newest edition.
And as the title says, each week we get lost in conversation about a wide range of topics, including movies, comics, games, art, TV, and even occasionally sports.
We play games and discuss pivotal topics like who would win in a fight, the Kool-Aid Man or Tony the Tiger, and examine the hot-button issues of the world of geekdom.
We keep things fresh by taking timeless topics in new directions. We are simply three friends having a fun time talking about life's most fascinating foibles.
Stay connected with us every Tuesday on iTunes or at geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 90, and we're going to be continuing a segment we like to call Over Under.
I always see myself as just a small component of that, but my responsibility is to all of those other people. It's not, because it's not about me. It's about the whole thing. It's about the story. It's about the film.
All right, for this segment, as Brendan was alluding to right before the break, we're just going to talk about some of the films that are coming up later this month. We're going to talk about a hypothetical Rotten Tomatoes score, and we'll discuss whether you think it'll be over that or under that and why. So, obviously, this weekend we had Interstellar and Big Hero 6. So we're going to skip this weekend. We'll move on to the rest of the month. And coming up next weekend is a film that I'm personally not really looking forward to a ton, but it is Dumb and Dumber 2, T.O. What is the over-under for Dumb and Dumber 2 at 40%?
Oh, good Lord. I cannot explain how not excited I am for this.
Sure.
I have a strange feeling it's going to ruin my fond memory.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take the under, and as I was doing some research on this, I think the audience score was like 94 or 5 something. It's like ridiculously high that want to see this film, and I guess there's 95% of people on Rotten Tomatoes are masochists. I guess I cannot envision a scenario. This is going to be a good film. I'll take the under.
I'm also taking the under. I think this is going to end up in the 20s somewhere. I really and I think just judging, and mostly because Dumb and Dumber, I think most people like these days because that kind of over-the-top and goofy humor, I guess, it was more accessible in the 90s for some reason. And I think a lot of people still like that movie more for nostalgic reasons. The same reason for maybe a movie like Happy Gilmore or Billy Madison.
I was just about to say, like, those kinds of movies, or the Chris Farley stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of people like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but I think it's more from a nostalgic standpoint. If Dumb and Dumber, the first movie, was released today, it'd probably get like in the 20% somewhere on Rotten Tomatoes. And in my opinion, the sequel just looks a lot less funny. A lot of the trailers didn't really make me laugh that much, unfortunately. So I'm definitely taking the under here.
I'd be really curious to hear from a lot of people that grew up watching that movie, like us, if they went back and rewatched it now, what their feeling would be like, either with or without the nostalgia. I'd be curious because, like you were saying, Nate, I mean, if I was to go back and rewatch this now, I'm not sure I would love it like I did as a kid. But maybe it would because there is a nostalgia aspect to it. But
I tried doing that because Dumb and Dumber was on Comedy Central yesterday.
Yeah.
And I found myself laughing a lot less than I used to. And I think a lot of the stuff that I still find funny are the really subtle things where when they first see each other again, and he's like, "How was your day?" It's like, not bad. I fell down the jetway again. But I love like that, like, oh, sure. Again, okay. I love the little dialogue touches.
Yeah.
A lot of the over-the-top stuff.
Yeah, and like I've done that with Ace Ventura because I love that movie.
Yeah.
Coming up, and it doesn't hold up the same way. And even like you said, I think Adam Sandler stuff holds up a little better. In some of the big Carrie stuff, but comedy's changed. I mean, I think it probably hit around. It's been like There's Something About Mary where like the comedy game kind of changed a little bit with like what Apatow did, and I don't think the old comedy holds up outside of nostalgia anymore.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I'm 100% agree with you guys. And unless the trailers are just really marketing this terribly and the film is going to be different or there's going to be more depth to it than what we're seeing,
depth.
I don't necessarily see that happening. I think what you're seeing in the trailers is what you're going to get. And for that alone, especially for critics, they don't really care for that kind of stuff. I completely agree. While I do think that it could hit the 40% because there are a lot of critics out there, they grew up watching that kind of stuff too. So maybe because of nostalgia, they could buy into it a little bit more. So I could see it getting to 40%, but I don't think so. I think it could be in the 20s. I'm going to say around 30%.
Okay.
Is where I'm going to be. But all right, going to something completely different. Nate, what do you think about Foxcatcher hitting 80%?
Oh, this one. Oh, this has been the easiest so far. Well, I don't know. The last one's pretty easy. I'll take the over. I think that it's like I had no idea what this movie was until you came on the Green Room Report and our fall preview. And after you talked to me about it, when you were like, well, actually, like one of my most anticipated movies. I was like, oh, great. A ton of preparation, clearly.
Yeah.
Then I went back and I started to look at it because it wasn't getting a ton of buzz.
Sure.
And now that I've seen the trailer for it, I can't wait. And I think that this is going to be huge, especially for Steve Carell. But I mean, there's a great cast there. I'm a Channing Tatum fan anyway. I think that I almost think that he tends to be a little underrated based on some of the movies that he's done.
Sure.
But I think that Carell is going to be incredible, and obviously with Tatum and Ruffalo there too, I think we're going to get some really, really good performances in this movie. And plus, it's a really compelling story anyway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take the over.
I think, it's way too easy over on this one. I think that you're going to easily see at least the low 90s on this movie. I think I can easily see that. I think it's going to get really well regarded for its performances more than anything else. It looks like a really frightening film too.
The real story is, if you know it. It's pretty
I do know the story, and it's very frightening. And if you look at Bennett Miller's track record of other films, I mean, he's really got a good streak going as far as biopics. I mean, he directed Capote with Philip Seymour Hoffman. He did Moneyball with Brad Pitt. Now he's got Foxcatcher. This guy knows how to make some really good visceral biopics.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty much right in the same ballpark as you guys, and I can only echo your sentiments. I do think that this will be over 80%. Very well could be over 90%, as you were talking about, Brendan. And, speaking of Bennett Miller, I mean, this did really well at Cannes.
He won Best Director for it, yeah.
Absolutely. So I completely agree with you there that it's not just going to be a well-directed film. You're going to see some amazing performances. This is, at least it looks to be, Channing Tatum's best performance of his career. He looks very layered, very stoic at times, very emotional at other times.
Right.
And what can you say about Steve Carell? Man, I've only heard amazing things about this guy from this film, and just looking at him in a trailer, you're like, oh my god, like he just looks like he's just not a person to mess with, and his dynamics with Tatum in this film is just going to be incredible. I certainly hope there is Oscar stuff for these actors in this film coming off of it.
Completely agree.
So I haven't seen it yet, but I'm definitely keeping my hopes up pretty high for sure.
Me too.
All right, let's move on to the next week with November 21st. And, of course, let's start with the big one and The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part Uno. Nate, I'll toss it to you first. What's the over-under for 70% for The Hunger Games?
I think I'll take the over. I don't know how confident I am in that. But I think I'll take the over. I still think that Jennifer Lawrence is great, and from what I've read, it seems like Philip Seymour Hoffman finished. I know he's in the trailer, so I think he finished the filming in this one, so that it'll be good. Thought his character was really good, and I mean, obviously it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, so in it, then he's going to be good. I was a fan of the first two movies. I mean, especially when they're based, these movies that are based on young adult novels, you never really know how they're going to go, but I thought that they did a really good job for someone like me who hadn't read any of the books. I was entertained throughout, and there was nothing, I mean, like there's always nitpicky stuff, but I thought by and large I enjoyed both previous films. So I guess I'll take the over.
This is a really difficult one because, again, I think I'd probably predict it right around this range. And mainly because here's the thing. The second movie was the better received of the first two, obviously, and that's when they got Francis Lawrence involved to direct it, and then we know he's directing Mockingjay Part 1 and 2. So it's going to maintain the consistent style and tone that we actually liked with Catching Fire. And I agree. I thought the first movie was also very good. I thought Catching Fire was even better. So it's going to carry that over. At the same time, I know the movie. I don't know the source material as much as you, and we were talking about this a little bit. I know there's going to be some criticism out there that it's going to have to be judged as only half a movie, so it's not going to feel very conclusive, obviously.
And that was my main motivation for the over/under at 70%, because I could totally see that being a big criticism for a lot of people.
Right. But having said that, though, even though I still think there's going to be enough good things here. I think I'm still taking the over here, but I do think the movie will land somewhere in the mid-70s on Rotten Tomatoes. It'll really, the only big criticism will be that we have to judge it as it is, and it's still only half a movie, so we really can't properly say what we think until the second half comes out.
Well, I guess for me, I think one of the first things I want to touch on is something that you touched on, is that it's directed by Francis Lawrence, who did Catching Fire. Now, Catching Fire got 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is really high for this kind of genre, I think. And I agree with you. I really did like it. I really liked the first one quite a bit, and this one was even better. The reason that I'm going to go with higher, and I think the reason I'm going to go with higher, and maybe even higher than you, Brennan, is the fact that even the second one left on what could be considered a teaser. Like, there was no conclusion to the second one either. It very much left us in, okay, we're leading up to this third one. And if you know the source material, there is a little bit of a breaking point that I think that this film will end on that will make sense. Now, I haven't read Harry Potter, so I don't know if that's the case with that book series. Obviously, Twilight certainly didn't need to break up their last one. And I'm just going to say that, of course, I didn't read it, but in this one, it would kind of make sense to me given the source material. So I could see that. In fact, even more so than maybe the second one, depending on how it's done. Now, I have full faith in Francis Lawrence. I think he's going to do a good job of ending this in the right place and setting up the final conclusion. I think there's enough here from a story standpoint that you could break it up into two. The one thing that I'm kind of curious about is the third book in general wasn't received as much as the first two from book readers. So I'm kind of curious how they're going to change things up a bit, if they do at all. But that being said, I mean, I think you could see 80-81% if handled well, given the source material here. I think it could be cool.
And you might be right.
Yeah, and and Philip Seymour Hoffman, you know, as you're touching on, Nate, with his character, could be quite interesting to see what they do with that as well. So I know he got like 80-90% of his filming done before he passed away. So we shall see. Okay, real fast, the last one I want to touch on is, again, not another film that I'm looking forward to, but at the end of the month, we also get Horrible Bosses 2. What is the over-under that this one hits 60% on Rotten Tomatoes?
I still can't believe... Well, I guess I understand it, that they're making a sequel, because the first one made so much money. But I did not enjoy the first movie. I don't know where you guys stand on it. So when they announced that they were going to make a second one, it wasn't really a surprise, but I wasn't really excited about it either. 60%, I guess I'll take the under, and I'm going to hope for it, because I don't know. I mean, I don't particularly love... oh, shoot. Now I can't... Is it Day? Is that his name?
Charlie Day.
Charlie Day, yes. Thank you. I find him a bit off-putting anyway, and I don't know. I can't envision a situation where everybody goes, wow, this is really good, so I'll take the under.
I'm also taking the under on this one. I'm kind of glad you mentioned this, Nate, because I agree. I didn't think Horrible Bosses, the first one, was terrible or anything, but I didn't think it was a great movie to warrant a sequel. I really think a lot of the money making from it really came down to the fact that the cast itself on paper is awesome.
Yeah,
it really is. It's a great cast more than anything else. And I think at this point, Kevin Spacey was getting a lot more steam after, with his House of Cards stink and things like that. So there was a lot of attraction to the movie on its own. And I think that's where a lot of the money came from. But I don't think this movie is gonna really be received all too well. I think it's gonna be it's gonna be a forced sequel just for the sake of a money grab. I think people are gonna recognize that.
Well, I may be a little bit higher than you guys, but not because I'm looking forward to it, but I guess what I'm basing it off of, the first one got a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. So there is an audience for this, even from a critical standpoint. And the cast is awesome, as you touched on, Brennan. There's a lot there as far as, what this cast can do. I like Charlie Day a lot more than you, Nate. I think I really like him as an actor, quite honestly. The biggest thing that I see where it could work and where it could be over the 60% mark, at least from the trailers, I'm getting the sense that the story isn't 100% the exact same from the other one. Because obviously with comedy sequels like this, or just sequels in general, is of course they're going to take the same premise and try to redo that again, but try to make it fresh and new. And I feel like with this one, they're sort of taking the same premise, but it looks completely different to me than I think the first one in a lot of ways. And I think if they can get that formula to work, where it's the same cast working together, like their chemistry is good and they have a decent story here, sort of based off of the same premise, I could see critics liking it enough that it would hit that 60% mark and be over. So that, to me, I think is the hit or miss point.
Will it change your opinion when I say the guy directing it also directed That's My Boy?
I didn't see That's My Boy, so I honestly don't know much about him as a director, quite honestly. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I think it's very, very much up in the air. But
sure.
Anyway, that's all we got for Over Under this month. There's a lot more I feel like we could talk about, but slightly running out of time, but good conversation on that.
I think it's a pretty interesting prediction of how the final year is going to look out, but I think there's a lot of great stuff coming. I think this is going to be a really strong year, at least from an awards standpoint.
Sure.
And I think 2014 has been a stellar year in general already.
I know. Another big one that's coming out later this month that we didn't have time to talk about was The Imitation Game. Benedict Cumberbatch. I mean, I'm assuming we're all looking forward to that one on some level.
Oh, yeah. So. I love the batch.
Yeah, of course.
All right, well, so that'll do it, as JD said, for our segment on Over Under. You can let us know if you agree or disagree with our takes here. You can leave us a comment on Facebook or Twitter, or email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. But either way, we'd love to hear some of your thoughts here and some of your thoughts on the future films coming out, what you're looking forward to and what you think it's going to be.
Yeah, definitely hit us up. Would love to hear your thoughts. Before we get out of here, Nate, thanks so much for joining us, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me on. It's always fun to get to talk some movies, and I really appreciate you guys having me on. And again, I'll thank you again for your last appearance on the Green Room.
Yeah, of course.
It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, speaking of your podcast, tell us where we can find it on the internet, and where can we find you on the internet?
Oh, you can find me on the internet everywhere. I'm on Facebook, Nathan Cunningham. I'm on Twitter at @NCunninghamHS. You can find all of my content and others' content and from the Hound Sports family at houndsports.com, or specifically the pop culture stuff at houndsports.com/The Green Room, and all of our podcasts are archived on there, and they're also right on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/houndsportsnetwork.
Yeah, definitely go check it out. It's fantastic stuff. You guys do some really great work there. I know you like to be humble, but I will echo, it's really great stuff. Go follow them. And that should do it for this week's show. Be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/InSessionFilm. You can also follow us on Twitter at InSessionFilm, and on Google Plus and YouTube, just search InSession Film and sign up for our monthly newsletter. You can do that on our Facebook page by clicking the newsletter tab, or on our site at InSessionFilm.com/newsletter.
For more thoughts on the films that we watch, you can check us out on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. We also try to respond to every piece of email that we get, so you can also email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher. And while you're on iTunes, you can leave us a comment there and review there. We'd appreciate some feedback there as well. You can also check us out on our Listen Now page, which is on our website at InSessionFilm.com/listen-now.
And the InSession Film Podcast is supported by our super awesome listeners like you. Once again, if you want to help us, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com. You can click on our bonus content tab in our main menu to hear that for just a small donation of 99 cents. You can also visit the InSession Film store, get a fun t-shirt or tie or a mug, or you can just go to InSessionFilm.com/donate, and you'll see a bunch of information there on how you can help us out. One thing that I would highly recommend is that you can hear everything we do, whether it's these main shows, our extra film podcasts, or our bonus content. You can listen It's all of that under one roof on our mobile app for just a one-time fee of $1.99. You can find that app on the Amazon Market for Android devices, the Windows 8 phone store for Windows devices, and the Podcast Box app for iOS devices. All those details are on the site at InSessionFilm.com/apps. And next week on the show, ideally, I'd like to do Foxcatcher. I have no idea if we're going to get that or not. Most likely not.
No,
I would guess.
I think we got to plan differently, man.
Yeah, so we'll figure that out pretty soon, in the next couple days. So be sure to be on the lookout for that, as well as what our top 3 will be. And for our extra film segment this week, Brennan and I are at least going to do Big Hero 6. I want to talk about it, so that should be fun.
You already saw it. I haven't seen it yet, but it'll at least give us a chance to talk about the big movie this weekend, just a little bit late in the game, but either way, we get to talk about it.
Yeah, so we'll do that. As far as another film, obviously, I'd like to do Whiplash whenever we get that. We'll probably have to wait a few weeks on that as well.
Sure.
Before we get out of here, Nate, any final thoughts on anything?
I guess just to reiterate, I certainly give Interstellar a shot. It's good enough to, I think, to warrant a viewing.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just it's crazy. We like your poll question that goes through Nolan's body of work, and there's just so many. If you look at what he's done, there's so many home runs. You know what I mean? So many movies that were so good. And so it's got to the point where that's what we expect from him. And even though this one has been a double, which is still good, we see it as a disappointment. So I would highly recommend that everybody at least go and see it once. There's a lot to take in, but really there's some really beautiful things about this movie.
Leave it up to the sports guy to throw in sports analogies there. Love it. What about you, Brendan?
I'll echo those final thoughts as well. I think it is worth seeing. I think I liked it a little bit more than you guys did, because I still was quite moved by it. But having said that, though, it is still a disappointment, not only because of Nolan's body of work and how it has to measure up against other great near masterpieces, but we do recognize that there is a lot of things the movie could have done better on its own. I think there are some other moments that they really could have embraced the themes and the emotional core of the movie, that it wasn't quite there. It was there enough for me to feel moved by it, but I think this, as I mentioned, I've been waiting for a hard sci-fi movie with a real heartfelt message and theme at its core, similar to why I love a movie like AI. That movie is really challenging, but it's also very heartfelt. And I guess I've been waiting for something that's a bit kind of in that vein to come back again. This movie was almost there, but it wasn't quite there for me. So, like I said, it's definitely recommend it. Go see it. If you can find it on IMAX, I think that's the ideal way to see it. I think some of those sequences in space are great.
Sure.
But it's probably not going to end up being one of my favorite movies of the year.
No, I'm in that same vein, and I do think that it is worth seeing in theaters. I mean, I won't disagree with that. I mean, there is still a lot here to appreciate, despite whatever flaws I have of it. But as for final thoughts from me, I'll just say stay tuned for our bonus content. We're going to have an awesome conversation about this movie and spoilers that I can't wait to talk about, and I think it'll help me nail a little bit further of why I feel the way that I do, give us the freedom to talk about that.
Sure.
So definitely stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for our extra film this week where we'll talk about at least Big Hero 6. I can't wait to get into that. Nate, thanks again for joining us, man. Really glad that you were here.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was fun, as always.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you guys next week on the InSession Film Podcast. For the entire version of our podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Stitcher, or check us out online at InSessionFilm.com.